Mr. President, I rise today to discuss Senate 870. I am a passionately strong supporter of the effort to reauthorize the U.S. Fire Administration, the Assistance to Firefighters Grants Program, and the staffing for adequate fire and emergency response grant program. It is essential. I voted in favor of all of that legislation to reauthorize these key programs on April 20th of last year. And I remain strongly and staunchly in support of these efforts to support our first responders. Those who run into danger must know that we in Congress have their back. They keep our communities safe, and we must keep their resources safe in return. Unfortunately, the vote today is not just for the life-saving programs that I am staunchly on record as supporting. On the coattails of this non-controversial bill to protect our heroes, our colleagues in the House tacked on a dangerous, additional 90-page package of provisions that merged the Senate's Advance Act and the House's Atomic Energy Advancement Act. Well, because of this airdrop provision into the fire bill, I will be opposing final passage of this bill. Well, let me go now to what is the Advance Act, and why would they try to attach it to something that is absolutely essential? Why would they not just bring it out, try to have a big debate on it? Well, I'll tell you why. The original version of the Advance Act, which I voted against in the committee, was weakened further and watered down further in negotiations with the House. The new language attempts to water down the duties of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. It puts communities on the back burner, and it dilutes existing protocols that keep our nation safe from the threat of nuclear war. That's what we're talking about today, nuclear war. It puts promotion over protection and corporate profits over community cleanup. Notably, the provisions from the Senate bill that would have provided a much-needed $225 million for communities affected by nuclear closures and $100 million to clean up contaminated tribal communities are not in the legislation anymore, as it came back from the House of Representatives. But the provisions to prop up the nuclear industry, they remain. I entered office just a year after the Nuclear Regulatory Commission was established in 1975. Why did we create a Nuclear Regulatory Commission? Very simple. Because there was an identification of a need for an independent oversight of nuclear domestic power plants in the United States and nuclear activity generally. And there was a decision looking at the Atomic Energy Commission, which existed, to say that agency is responsible for regulating nuclear power, but it's also responsible for promoting nuclear power here and around the world. And that was a fundamental conflict of interest. You promote something by minimizing the problems or ignoring the problems. And that was becoming a big problem, that they weren't dealing with the very real issues of safety that had been raised about nuclear power in our country. This is before 3 Mile Island, it's before Chernobyl, but it's anticipating the safety issues that were going to be growing and growing and growing. So the NRC's current mission, before this bill passes, reflects this critical responsibility to the American public. Regulation and licensing free from the influence of industry, and that puts health and safety above all else. So we have a separate agency, it's called the Department of Commerce. They can go and promote anything they want. They can try to sell whatever they want, domestically or internationally. But the agency in charge of safety is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They got to make sure that anything that the Department of Commerce is pushing doesn't wind up being a danger. So we create this dynamic tension inside of the government. And ultimately, that goal of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that puts health and safety above all else is what protects us against nuclear accidents here or overseas, wherever we're selling nuclear power plants. The ADVANCE Act, as attached to the Fire Grants and Safety Act, completely unrelated subject. One deals with the resources we're giving to firefighters, the resources we're giving to local fire departments in order to fight fires as they pop up in our local communities. That's something we all support. But what they did was they added to that bill language that would require, underline that, require the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to rewrite its mission, to state that its regulation and oversight should, and this is quote, not unnecessarily limit civilian nuclear activity, regardless of whether it is beneficial or detrimental to public safety and national security. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission shouldn't be the Nuclear Retail Commission. The Commission's duty is to regulate, not to facilitate. Their job is to ask all of the safety questions, to make sure the design is okay, to make sure that the waste is being stored properly, to make sure that an accident can't happen, to make sure that climate change, as the tides rise, doesn't swamp a nuclear power plant near a river, near the ocean. That's their job. It's to protect all the people who live in communities. We've got other agencies that are funded, able, and willing to fulfill the role of promoting nuclear power. But this legislation does nothing to assure communities at the front line of nuclear infrastructure that nuclear expansion won't come at their expense in local communities. It compels the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to identify how it can improve efficiency in its oversight and inspection programs, without asking it how it can also improve safety or public engagement so that the public can go in and ask questions about this nuclear power plant in their neighborhood. Force the CEO of the company to answer questions about concerns that people who live near a nuclear power plant might have. It provides no redress for families living near abandoned uranium mines and unsafe nuclear waste sites. At the very least, a rapid expansion of nuclear activity should be accompanied by rapid expansion of the resources and regulators that help protect community health and safety. If we do it, we should do it all together, one big package. This new language also fails to ensure continued American leadership on nuclear nonproliferation overseas. It fails to do anything to strengthen our current regime, and export licenses for nuclear materials and technology should be issued to countries that do not meet our own standards for nuclear safety and cooperation, only requiring, that's what this law now says, it will only require a notification to Congress after that nuclear license is issued in another country, and exempting even this after-the-fact notification for exports of up to 20% enriched uranium. And you're right, whenever you hear the words uranium or plutonium, your ears should perk up. Because in many countries, they see a nuclear power plant as a generator of electricity that has this side effect of uranium and plutonium. But in the eyes of some countries, and we saw that in Iran, in Iraq, in North Korea, as they got nuclear power plants, They saw it as a place where they can get uranium and plutonium that has this wonderful byproduct of electricity that it also generates. So we should be concerned because we've already been forewarned by our experiences over the last 20 or 30 years. We can see what happens if there isn't a proper recognition of how all of this material can, in fact, be diverted. We shouldn't get a heads up about the fact that Saudi Arabia now has American nuclear material. That shouldn't happen after the fact. That should happen before the fact. We should know that this is going to happen. The bill also pushes the Secretary of Energy to identify generally authorized countries for exports beyond those with existing 1, 2, 3 agreements. So what are 1, 2, 3 agreements in the Atomic Energy Act? Well, 1, 2, 3 agreements lay the foundation for the responsible exchange of nuclear materials and technology with countries that share common guardrails for nuclear safety. That is, the diversion of uranium and plutonium and other nuclear materials in a way that ultimately could wind up in a bomb-making program somewhere in the world. We should not be looking for ways to work around or weaken our export standards even further. Throughout my career, I have seen nuclear safety and nonproliferation undermined in the interest of the short-term geopolitical concerns of a particular administration or industry at the expense of the longer-term nuclear nonproliferation goals, which we say are our highest foreign policy objectives. They get compromised in the short term because one administration or another just wants to use nuclear power plants as a way of ingratiating the United States into the good favor of a particular country. Could be Saudi Arabia soon, could be another country right after that, but without all the safeguards that should be there in order to protect against diversion of these materials. So the United States is supposed to be the leader in the global arena. In a nation with nuclear capabilities, we have a duty to set the strongest possible standards for domestic and international nuclear activities as an example to the rest of the world. We also have to clean up our existing messes, particularly in tribal and environmental justice communities, before investing in anything that might make those messes worse. As a result, despite my strong and continued support for the fire safety grants and my respect for my colleagues working on this issue, I must vote no. Now, in 1982, I wrote a book about nuclear proliferation and about domestic nuclear power plants. The book was entitled Nuclear Peril: The Politics of Proliferation. And it's what happens when there is a short-changing of the safety, the security measures which should be put in place. And it also dealt with the issues domestically of a reduction in the generalized supervision of nuclear power plants in terms of having the highest possible safety standards. Now, there are many in this institution who want to see a vast expansion of nuclear power using plutonium and uranium in the United States. And they also support a vast expansion of nuclear power plants around the world using uranium and plutonium. And I appreciate the fact that they want to do that, and many want to see that happen in the name of climate change because it reduces greenhouse gases. But it has its own problems. It brings its own problems. We still don't have a solution to where we're going to bury all the nuclear waste in the United States. The Yucca Mountain facility in Nevada still hasn't been completed, and in my opinion, it will never be completed. And we're now up to 35 years working on it. And similarly, overseas, if we get into a race with other countries, Russia or China, in the export of nuclear power plants, we should not lower the standards. We should ensure that we're in as the responsible provider of nuclear power around the world so that we reduce dramatically the threat of nonproliferation. So my book in 1982 is directly relevant to this subject right here. Because whether it be North Korea, they converted a civilian nuclear power plant over to a bomb-making factory, whether it be in Iraq with Saddam Hussein, whether it be in Iran, you name it, the story's the same. So we have to be very responsible, ensure we have the highest standards. And that's my goal in coming out here. And I am going to vote no, because I think if we are going to be encouraging a brand new era of nuclear power here domestically and internationally, we should have that discussion. It shouldn't be attached to the fire safety bill to make sure that firefighters can put out the fire in the house that's next door to us. We all are going to agree on that. On this issue, however, the issue of nuclear nonproliferation, the domestic safety of power plants in our country, that's a different subject. But honestly, my great friend, Chairman Copper, who is just such an incredible leader on clean energy, the chairman of the committee that produced the most important climate bill in 2022 in a generation, he is my friend, and I thank him for engaging in a colloquy with me to clarify in detail the legislative intent of some of these provisions, and I look forward to continuing to work on efforts to protect communities, clean up toxic waste, and create a consent-based pathway to nuclear waste storage in our country. The decision to put all of the nuclear waste in our country in Yucca Mountain, it was a political decision. I was in the room when it was made. The National Academy of Sciences said that the Yucca Mountain facility was at the bottom of the places in our country. It's near a river. It's near an earthquake fault. No wonder we haven't finished it. The safety questions were never answered at the beginning. And that's all I ask. If we're going to move into a new era of nuclear power here and around the world, let's ask the questions up front. Let's make sure we put the safeguards in place. Let's make sure we avoid having to look back and say, how in the world did we ever allow something like that to ever occur again? So I thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity to be out here, and with that, I yield back.